City of Stevens Point Historic Preservation Design Review Meeting, recorded September 30th, 2024.
To call the meeting of the Historic Preservation Design Review Commission for September 30th, 2024 to order. Roll call.
Siebert.
Here.
Monk.
Here.
Christensen.
Here.
Calland.
Here.
McFarland.
Here.
Malevsky.
Here.
And Finn.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum.
Okay. Discussion and possible action on report of the August 26, 2024 meeting of Historic Design Review Commission. Entertain a motion to accept the minutes as printed.
I move to accept the minutes as printed.
Second, please.
I'll second that.
Okay. Mark, thank you very much. All those in favor, aye.
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 Opposed? Number 3. Or can we skip to number 4?
Tim.
No.
That would be the quickest meeting we'd ever have.
I guess not. Presentation and discussion on the draft historic preservation plan. So, your floor.
Yes. So, as folks on the commission know, this has been a project well underway for the last probably about 15, 18 months or so now. Really kickstarting back in the summer of 2023, having the conversation originally about an outside firm doing the brunt of the work in creating this plan. Ultimately, as folks recall, the cost to have an outside firm produce this plan was way more than what the city could reasonably afford. So that was really the reason for us kind of doing an about face and setting forth a new direction of creating the plan internally versus that of outside. So just want to start off with these first couple slides here. This is verbatim from what I included in the 2 Pres Plan workshops back in May, just to kind of bring us all back up to speed again about what a preservation plan is, and more importantly, why are we looking to do it. So what is this preservation plan all entail? It is considered a long-range planning document outlining specific goals, objectives, and policies that we as a city should undertake related to historic preservation. It's meant to serve as a guide not only for myself, but also for you folks and our elected officials to guide future action and priorities within the preservation topic. And then also address certain issues that are commonplace in our community and is only going to further increase in intensity in the years ahead. So some of the examples that I have on the screen is the failure to maintain buildings, the cost of building repair, and then lastly, inappropriate building improvements that have been conducted over the years. So this is something that I'll probably talk a little bit more during our Plan Commission meeting next week, Monday, is that the whole concept of preservation planning is a relatively new phenomenon and hasn't been in existence for quite that long. Obviously, preservation as a practice of outlining what can and can't be done on a historic building has been on the books for a number of decades. But as it relates to preservation administration within local governance, that's really been in place since the mid-1960s with the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act. So currently, right now, 2024, there's about 8 or so states that make up our union that require communities of a certain size and of those who have a historic inventory to produce a planning document like what's before you all tonight. Wisconsin is not one of those states. I believe Florida, for some reason, sticks out as the first state that required that. To the contrary, the other remaining states, Wisconsin included, incorporate preservation planning as part of a community's broader comprehensive plan. So you see here in the city and in Wisconsin, within one of the required topic areas that makes up a comprehensive plan, that being the social, cultural, and natural resources, or agricultural, cultural, and natural resources element of the comprehensive plan. That does touch on preservation planning, but only really skimming the surface. So what we've seen here in the state is individual communities kind of going above and beyond what the state requires them to do, and kind of take the approach of what communities in that of Florida or some of the other half dozen or so states that I mentioned that require comprehensive or require preservation plans to really go about creating their own set of long-term preservation plans in their community. So some of the examples I have on the screen, we're seeing River Falls and Madison, who have adopted their own preservation plan over the last couple of years, and really serves as the basis for what we're looking to do here in Stevens Point. So why are we creating the plan? There's a lot of different reasons why. Kind of the big ones that stand out is, first and foremost, we're required by local ordinance to do so. We've made some traction early on when we first created this commission back in the late 1980s with the creation of the Clark Street Plan back in, I believe, '88. But really since then, there hasn't been much work to create either a citywide preservation plan or sub-area preservation plans of a given historic district. So that's one reason. And the second reason, obviously we all know as a community the events that took place, Fox Theater back in 2019. And the comment I raised during the Pres Plan workshops back in May was that those events that took place back in 2019 really brought the community together in a way as it relates to preservation to at least have the conversation, right? The questions that folks have raised back in the late 2019s regarding the Fox Theater, questions like what more can be done by me as an individual citizen, what more can we as a city do to make sure another example like this doesn't happen again. And so this preservation plan that's included in the packet is really meant to serve as that first step, that guiding document to see what are some specific tangible specific policies or actionable steps that we can do going forward. So components of the preservation plan, that's outlined more so in the goals, objectives, and policies section that I'll touch on in a little bit. These focus on all the different items that you see on the screen, those of which we touched on again during those two workshops back in May. So for the conversation, I'm going to break it down into 3 different sections. First one being the introductory chapters, second segment being the goals, objectives, policies chapter, and then the last chunk being the implementation section of it. So first, I'm going to touch on the introductory. Okay, we can't hear you. Sorry. There must be something on my end. I'll just try to talk and, or maybe Casey, if you want to think while I'm speaking. So introductory chapters, so these are the first few items. I'm actually going to switch over to the big screen here. Switch over to this slide. So these introductory chapters, I don't anticipate really speaking at length about it, but this really serves as that guiding point to say where are we at right now as it relates to preservation, and where are we going looking back over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So for this section, I have it broken down into a couple of different topics that I want to touch on. So kind of going in sequential order here in the plan, I'm going to start back up. Give me. So for the first section, this I believe is, just going to slide here. This would be starting on page 14 of the plan. So this section really provides more of a timeline of what are some specific preservation events that took place here in the city, really since our founding back in the 1800s. As I mentioned before, really the brunt of the preservation administration work that we as a community have done really started back in the really from the 1980s and onward, but there was a lot more events that took place or specific actions that took place that really contributed to the preservation of our historic buildings and just expanding on the conversation of historic preservation as well. Sorry, Tim. So next section outlines, this would be starting on page 17, outlines some of the existing preservation administration practices that take place here in Stevens Point. So this touches on the specific commissions that are created by the city and have some sort of play into preservation administration, chief among them this group, but also that of the city's Plan Commission, Redevelopment Authority, Parks Commission, and Board of Public Works. Beyond some of the existing actions that exist here in the city, I also touched on the urban design guidelines, the architectural components behind what you can and can't do on a historic building, and then likewise the existing financial resource programs that exist. The next section, this would be page 20. This is something that I think is really important to include in any sort of long-range planning document, but especially preservation, a long-term preservation plan, and that being to establish the legal basis of why are we focused on preservation administration, not only on the local level, but also on the state and federal level as well. So you see on the federal level, I touch on the aforementioned National Historic Preservation Act that created the National Register of Historic Places and is administered under the National Park Service. And then secondly, under the National Historic Preservation Act, it created the Certified Local Government program. On the state level, touch on comprehensive planning law. As I mentioned earlier, that really created that nexus of the different topic areas that make up a comprehensive plan, historic preservation being included. State Statute 6223, which is effectively the statute that enables communities to administer zoning, their zoning powers here in the state. And then lastly, the most recent version of the statewide historic preservation plan. Locally, touch on the city's current comprehensive plan dating back to 2006 and outline some of the existing components of that comprehensive plan that touch on historic preservation and then broader land use planning that may impact preservation as well. And then again, lastly, some of the recent surveys and preservation documents that have been drafted really since this commission has been adopted in the 1980s, or created in the 1980s. Next item would be really just going to skim past this, highlighting the city's current historic inventory. So this touches on our existing historic districts and design review districts, our existing local landmark sites, as well as the districts and individual properties that are eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. So that would be starting on page 32 of the planning document that you see. Next then would be, as I mentioned over the last few months now, the social and ethnic groups chapter. So touching on some of the specific social and ethnic groups that contributed to our city's history. Polish community, the German community, the Scandinavian community, Jewish immigrants, and then the Hmong population as well. Obviously, I could have talked way more. I could have written a dissertation about each one of those groups. So for me, the biggest struggle was to try to parse that down into what folks need to know versus what may be interesting to know but is not necessarily important, to try to connect our local history of those social and ethnic groups together to create this planning document. And then the last thing before I kick it back to the group, at least for an initial conversation, is the planning process. This is something that more often than not goes overlooked, but myself as a planner, that is arguably one of the more important sections of a long-range planning document to address, that being really how did we get to where we are today. So talking about some of the one-on-one and small group stakeholder conversations that took place in the winter and early spring of 2024, the open houses that took place in May, the public survey that was available back in, I believe, May or June of this year, and then ultimately getting back to where we are, really fast forwarding to the conversation that we're having right now, along with the approval process, when that would come down the pipeline. So I'm going to stop right here. I know I gave you a lot. The reason why I kind of skimmed through all of this right at the forefront is just because, again, this is more background information. This is not necessarily the quote-unquote meat of the planning document, but again, really important stuff to really tie what we're going to talk about later with the goals, objectives, and policy section, really to tie those together. So if there's any questions or comments, I'd be happy to hear it while I try to figure out what's going on for these folks. I guess it's just me, so they might have ducked out.
Any comments or questions? Carol?
Not yet.
Not yet. You looked at me like you were.
No.
Anybody? Seeing none? Okay. You got that figured out yet?
No, I don't know, I'm cooking other options, but I mean, there's no one else on Zoom now. They must have hopped off, but I still have the icon. Oh, I mean, this is showing up. I will try it. Can you still hear me, Casey?
You can hear it here, and I went online and I can hear you do that as well. So.
Okay. Because I know earlier you couldn't see the, when I was talking, the mayor's name popping up on the audio box here, so maybe we'll try that for now. Any other comments for this first chunk? Otherwise, I'll kind of dive into the meat of the document.
Just that it's nice to finally see the structure, and I think you've done a great job so far of getting this all together.
Appreciate
so I would like to note that.
Appreciate it.
Anybody else?
Okay.
I pretty much
Oh.
mirror Barry's comment.
Thank you, gentlemen.
So next, I'm going to spend our time going over the sixth chapter, the goals, objectives, and policies. So this will be focusing on each of the different topic areas that we discussed in more detail during the two workshops back in May. So I'm going to start off with the topic area focusing on surveying efforts and priorities. I'm going to touch on each of these, really the policies, the proposed policies. I'm going to touch on each of these, some in more detail than others. I'm going to go through all 5, 6, 7, 8, however many policies there are for each topic area, and then kick it back to the commission for any clarification that folks may need or questions along the way. So again, first topic area is going to touch on the surveying efforts and priorities topic. So the first policy, 1.1, is to complete a citywide intensive survey by 2036. As folks have probably recalled me saying this in the past, our last intensive survey, which is more of a deep dive review of each property and each building 50 years of age or more here in the city. Our last intensive survey occurred in 2011, and the general rule of thumb in the preservation community is that the viability of a preservation plan exists for up to 25 years or so. So this 2036 is merely just tacking on 25 years to 2011. This is really important for the conversation in this plan, just in the context of the cost, right? Doing a citywide survey, it's gonna cost a fair deal of money. So outlining this early on in 2024 would help try to find some outside funding sources that can assist in funding that intensive survey. Second one, policy 1.2, is to resurvey the proposed Church of the Intersection St. Stephen's R.C. Church Historic District. Say that 5 times fast. So this was the proposed historic district that's bounded by Clark Street to the north, Rogers Street to the east, Ellis Street to the south, and Church Street to the west. This, as you recall during the workshops, I touched on each of the proposed historic districts, those being districts that are eligible for listing on the National Register, and really asked participants of those proposed districts, which district should take priority for a future National Register nomination, whenever that should occur. And the consensus from the group was to focus on the Church of the Intercession district, in part because of the degradation of the church that's been slowly occurring over the years. That the thought is that should this district be on the National Register, that the tax credit opportunities that exist with being on the National Register could assist in some of the long-term maintenance work of the building. The reason for the resurveying comment is because of the loss of the rectory, I believe, this would have been the far southeast corner of the larger city block. The question is really more so, since that building was contributing to this broader historic district, would this district still be eligible for listing on the National Register with the demolition of that structure? I don't know. I'm not a certified preservationist to know explicitly if that's the case or not, but that's really the first and foremost action, is to do a resurveying of that district to see, is it still viable for listing?
Out of curiosity, do you know when the school was built?
Not offhand. Not
I
easy.
think like 1929 or 1932, either one. You mean St. Stephen's? Yeah. It's either 29 or 32. It was built the
Okay.
same time as PJ, in the same ballpark. But it wasn't a rectory
Right.
that was torn down. It was a convent.
Convent, sorry.
Yeah.
It was a convent, so you got
It
to
was one of the two.
switch that out.
Yes,
Just gonna
yes.
say that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So,
And I have to tell you, they stood on their head to try to save the building. The problem was, there were all cells in the place, and all small individual rooms, unlike the convent. You know, the convent just had drapes between the nuns' individual little cubicles. And they had offices in there, and the way it had been built, it was, you would almost have to destroy the thing in order to save it. You know, you'd have to pull out all of the interior walls, I understand. Yeah. It was very difficult.
We tried to save it,
Right, yeah,
and
yeah. My
offered-
husband was on the council then, so I know that over time, it was just, yeah.
they just wouldn't listen.
Well, it wouldn't work for anything,
Yeah,
the
it
way it
would.
was.
We had a big
Right.
plan for it, but,
Yeah.
well, we're getting off.
Yeah.
policy 1.3, so kind of piggybacking on the last conversation I had, a follow question that I had during the workshops was, okay, let's say we resurvey the Church of the Intersection historic district, and it's found to not be eligible for the National Register. Okay, if that's the case, what should be the next district that we should prioritize for nomination to the National Register? And the perspective that was given by the group was that of the proposed Pine Street, Plover Street Historic District. That would be a good chunk of parcels kind of just to the north and west of where Belts and Carl D's are. And really one of the justifications that folks had during the workshops was this should be prioritized in part because of the number of buildings that make up that district. That is the largest district in terms of buildings that has not been listed on the National Register. So policy 1.4, kind of touching a little bit more on the future surveying efforts come the mid-2030s, that this policy outlines some specific areas here in the community that a consultant should prioritize as part of their surveying efforts. So that would be properties surrounding the Canadian National Railway from the Wisconsin River to Michigan Avenue, kind of that long, elongated east-west strip of land. Second one being the institutional district comprising of St. Joe's Catholic Church, Jefferson Elementary, and St. Paul Lutheran School. Third area being more of this is a more general location, but post-World War II housing development along Green Avenue, Ridge Road, and Janik Circle North. And then the last area being the Old Main neighborhood, really looking at the changes that have occurred from 2011 to the present to see if, how much loss of historic value of those buildings, how much of a loss, if any, has occurred over the last 25 years in this instance. Policy 1.5, prioritize areas in Stevens Point to conduct an archaeological survey. That's something that we haven't, at least as a broader city, has done in quite some time. So this is really beneficial not only for you folks as a commission, but also if you look for our planning commission, let's just say, when we're looking at future development, to make sure that it's not going to interfere on, say, any burial grounds, or just at least being cognizant should there be any burial grounds as it relates to potential development that may occur around that area. The second to the last policy recommendation is to promote future research and documentation of the ethnic groups that are mentioned, so the indigenous population, the Eastern Europeans, the Scandinavians, and the Hmong.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
I was just wondering if possible inclusion of Latinx and that, and also other groups like women, LGBTQ, and getting that representation.
We can if there's the consensus from the group that there's an interest in it.
Well, women were included in the survey thing, right?
Yes.
But not here.
But we can, yeah. Yeah, I personally, I don't have an issue of including that in the policy if.
I think that would be good for representation purposes.
So you said women, Latinx, and what else?
LGBTQ, whatever the letters are.
Yeah. Okay. And then the last one is to encourage surveys to be conducted for future targeted area master plans. This is the one policy area that's kind of segueing both between this commission and the planning commission. As part of updates to the city's comprehensive plan, we have identified, at least through certain sub areas here in the city, of creating unique targeted area master plans. So one being for, say, the Highway 10 corridor, one being for the South Side Church Street corridor, one being for the Stanley Street corridor, that this policy recommendation talks about that, hey, when we're going through the process of creating these targeted area master plans, which in part focuses a lot more on the built environment, that we should look to encourage surveys of those targeted areas alongside the master planning process, just to make sure that there's not going to be any contradictory nature between the two, and again, really to make sure that the built environment as proposed in the target area master plan is in alignment with any buildings or any sites that contributes to our historic inventory within those areas.
What about the north side?
As far as
Like Franklin Street and as a possible targeted area?
that would be something I guess I would. So I don't want to give a cop out, but to TBD. And the only reason for that is that we're wrapping up the east side and the southeast side of town as part of our comprehensive plan update. The next area will be the north side. So that's definitely something I can bring up later this year to see, is there an interest from the north side residents, District 1, District 4, to have a targeted area master plan? And if so, I think it sounds reasonable.
Well, and that, especially that area, the corridor right along the river and the north side, those are some of the oldest homes in Stevens Point, too.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So the other thing I was just going to say, when you, back to that 1.6, as far as those ethnic minorities that came, you know, it wasn't only Eastern European. Obviously, St. Stephen's was the Irish church. you
Yeah.
know. St. Joe's was the German one, you know. St. Stan's was kind of German, and then the Polish. So just as far as the Catholic community here in town, I mean, and obviously out in the country here, there are Irish cemeteries. You know, I mean, one couldn't go in the other cemetery. You had to be of the right ethnic group.
Yeah,
But
and-
anyway, so
Or
I would
married.
just, yeah.
No, I agree with you, Carol. In the context of the social and ethnic groups chapter, not only did I have to parse down what I touched on for each of the groups, I have also had to parse down the groups that are going to be, the groups that were explicitly mentioned in that chapter. Because as you mentioned, you could really parse that down into area by area if I really wanted to. It's just a matter of not providing too much that it might be not distracting but make someone less likely to read the document altogether.
Well, and just as, again, as far as the Irish, and I'm not Irish at all, but I don't think anyway, but they were here really early, and if you look at some of the names, you know, of the people that were here early on, they're Irish names. They left, and I'm not sure why they left, and obviously there was, you know, the soil here was good for potatoes.
Yes.
You know, as it was in other places,
Yeah.
you know, in the world.
So that's the 7 policies that make up the surveying efforts and priorities topic area. So I'm going to kick it back to the group. Of those 7 that we talked about, do folks want any clarifying questions, or do you folks have comments altogether? Are there certain policies that are overreaching? Are there certain items that you felt were missed within this area, within this topic area?
How far, or I guess how close to today's timeline are you considering? Because I know one of the documents I read briefly said, it talked about the Century Insurance Building down here on Main.
On North Point?
Yeah. Well, yeah, on North Point.
Yeah.
I mean, we're getting into 50 years plus on some of those buildings. Are those areas being considered for inclusion in this document, or is that too new?
So the Century building on North Point, that has already been identified as being eligible for listing.
But there are some, the only point I'm trying to make is there are some areas of the city that have some notable architectural mid-century modern that has not really ever been talked about.
Yeah, so the basis is still the 50 years, just because that's the first prong, essentially, that the state has to deem eligibility. The reason, in part, so if you look under the policy 1.4, the post-World War II housing development along Green Ave, Ridge Road, and Janik Circle North. The reason that for that bullet point to be included on here is that there were a number of homes in that area that did not meet that 50-year age requirement back in 2010, 2011 during our last survey, but have since surpassed that 50-year mark. So that's one component of the priority areas, is to address just that you mentioned. So.
Thank you.
Could you say something here like, to go along with what Carol was talking about, West European, which would...
Western, yeah.
Yeah, lump
Again.
German and Irish, English, ouch. That was dumb.
Yeah, no, I can.
Because there was a significant German population for a while.
Yeah. As a German myself, or someone of German ancestry, and a little bit of Dutch.
A little bit of Dutch.
Little bit.
Actually, there were Dutch here.
On my
too.
dad's mom's side.
There were Dutch here, too. There was a Dutch enclave for a while.
Yeah. Any other comments? If not, then I'll move along.
So do you want to include in this just a line underneath that this is what we're doing now? You know, we will, move on to the north side, so it doesn't look as though we are neglecting that, the other areas.
Are you talking about for
Just, in addition, you're talking about this one, section 1.6.
1.6? Okay.
Is there perhaps the idea that this is what we are looking at today? And we will look at those other areas in the future.
No, sure.
Doesn't 1.7 pretty much say that?
Are you talking about, when you say, Carol, different areas, are you talking about a geographical area, or are you
Kind of
referring
being
to an
more
ethnic group?
Yeah, I guess perhaps both.
Okay.
No.
Now, I would say the geographical area, that would be touched on between both 1.7 and 1.4.
Okay.
If it relates, as it relates to the specific social and ethnic groups, definitely, I mean, yeah, I can add some language in there to make it a little bit more clear.
I think especially under 1.4, just note that, areas where a majority of buildings start reaching that 50-plus years, we'll constantly monitoring that to be included in future efforts.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Any other comments? All right. So the next topic area will be kind of similar. Local and national district nominations. So policy 2.1 is to designate the city block bounded by Clark Street to the north, Division Street to the east, Ellis Street to the south, and Rogers Street to the west, to designate that city block to the Downtown Design Review District. The argument for that relates more to the topic of continuity of the Clark Street Historic District and that of the Downtown Design Review District. And once you get more in downtown, as folks may recall, that's really the one area as you drive along Clark Street that is outside of any historic district. So the argument for this is just to maintain that continuity through that corridor. The next one, and this policy 2.2, if 2.2 would be fulfilled, it would also fulfill policy 2.1 as well. This is kind of a, hey, which route do we as a community want to go going forward? That'll kind of be the judging point here for which one of these two, if both, would be met. Then, so policy 2.2 is to expand the district boundary of the local Clark Street Historic District to match the boundary of the Clark Street, Main Street Historic District that's on the National Register. Just maintain the same district boundaries, and really this would impact essentially the properties directly abutting Main Street from Division to Fremont. So just shooting straight north, the existing district boundary. I believe I mentioned in this segment somewhere that there is one discrepancy between the local district boundary and the national district boundary, and that relates to Saramore Park. Within our local Clark Street district, Saramore Park is in the Clark Street Historic District, but on the National Historic District, the Clark Street, Main Street District, Saramore Park is not. So I think that's one open-ended question that we would have to have as a commission and as a broader community is, should there be a consensus? Yes, we want to expand the boundary of the Clark Street Historic District. How should that, what impact should that have on Saramore? Should it be included or should it be excluded? Policy 2.3 is to promote dialogue with property owners of historic sites to encourage local landmark designation requests. So the local landmark designation request, if one is designated, they're subject to the commission's design guidelines. And really this is kind of spearheading, this is kind of a mix between the local nominations and the educational component. There's a number of property owners, I'm sure, who are not who don't know that their property is eligible for National District nomination. So first and foremost, having that conversation with those folks to say, hey, you possess a building and or a site that is of historical significance, having that conversation, and then segueing that to, hey, have you considered a local landmark request, outline some of the benefits, some of the potential drawbacks that that folks may feel with a designation request. I think somewhere in here I give the example of the Altenburg Dairy building, the fact that as part of that adaptive reuse project, they went through the local landmark designation request to be subject to more flexible building code requirements as part of that adaptive reuse project. So part of this conversation under policy 2.3 is to outline kind of some of the positive benefits that someone may see, that someone may have with a district, with a landmark designation that may not be seen by most people. Policy 2.4 rather, is to require property owner consent for local historic district nominations. As we talked about during one of the workshops in May, technically anybody could request a district or a individual piece of property to be designated here locally. This policy recommendation outlines that, hey, the impacted property owner or property owners should have to consent to such a nomination. Ultimately, if it's the latter, a district nomination, there'll have to be some conversation as a commission as to, should it be 100% of the property owners that make up the district? Should it be 75%, 50%? Pick a number. That's something that I didn't address in here just because that's gonna require more of a conversation from this group. Policy 2.5 is to prepare a typo in here, A, not an, a report of each eligible National Historic District every 5 years. This is really meant to increase public awareness again of the different National Historic Districts that exist, outline some of the changes that have occurred over the years, both positive and negative, and really have a conversation as a broader community and a commission for some policy recommendations to address going forward. Policy 2.6 is kind of what we talked about earlier, to designate the Church of the Intercession Historic District to the National Register should a future intensive survey confirm eligibility to the National Register. Policy 2.7, similar again, designate the Pine Street Plover Street Historic District to the National Register. And then policy 2.8, this is really more so having the city lead by example in a way, and that being to prioritize buildings and properties under city ownership for National Register nominations. So some of the examples that I have in here taken from the 2011 intensive survey report being a number of buildings within Iverson Park, the sewage treatment plant, and then Bucol Park as a whole. So again, I'm going to stop here, kick it back to the commission if there's any clarifying questions or feedback altogether.
Just my apologies, because I do see you've got 1040 Ridge Road in there. That's the area that I think we should be, I was talking about earlier, so you already have taken that into consideration.
Perfect. It's been a week since I last looked at this, so it's I'm losing a little bit of my memory already.
And put a T at the end of plan.
Yeah.
And the sewage treatment plan.
Yeah, I saw that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just extra tea, yeah.
Yep.
Just to clarify, when you gave me my orientation the other day, Adam,
Yeah.
My understanding of the property owner consent, I thought you meant for an individual property that you were saying theoretically somebody could put a building up for the National Register of Historic Places without the property owner consenting. So that's our I thought you meant a single property. But here it says for a district. Is that the way it is? I tried to read this really quickly
Yeah.
while you're going over the other stuff, but,
Yeah.
so right now, how is it right now in order to designate a district? Do property owners have to approve?
So I'll give the example of the Church of the Intercession Historic District, because I think there's only 2 unique property owners. Technically, anybody could petition this commission to designate that as a local district without those 2 property owners signing off.
That's the way it is now.
That's the way it is now. Ultimately, there is the notification process that they would have to be notified of such a request. They can participate, obviously, in the public hearings that would occur before this body and the Common Council. But ultimately, unlike, since it's fresh on my mind, a business improvement district, there isn't a requirement that says 100% or no more than X% of the property owners may dissent to a nomination. So
Okay, well, there's only 2 property owners there, so that still is muddled in my mind.
Yeah.
What happened with the Clark Main Street District?
So that
which is
was-
already a historic district. Did the city just declare it that, or did they have to get approval from people who own the homes?
So that district was designated onto the National Register in the late 2010. Officially on the state level in 2020, on the National Register in early 2021. And that, through a National Register nomination process, the state does require community meetings, as Mark was privy to back in the day. There is a little bit more of a consent
Consensus?
requirement for national district nomination requests.
Okay.
Not for local. So this would be,
Oh, yeah, okay.
so this would be focusing more just on the local component.
Adam, we did vote, because I lived in the district. We did, pretty much everybody wanted to be historic district. That block between Prentice and Reserve and Division Street did not want to be in the historic district, nor did Main Street. And that's how it's still standing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, I was confusing the local designation with the national.
Yeah,
So
no, there's a lot of
locally-
moving parts.
Right, so locally,
Just out of curiosity, if you wanted to designate a property for the National Register of Historic Properties, it doesn't have to go through this commission, does it?
It does not. There is, I mean, you as a commission do not have to approve of it. You're not required to approve of it. However, the state does allow you the opportunity to provide feedback on the request. So the last time, this was for an individual site, the convent property, about maybe a year ago or so. One agenda item we had for this commission to consider and ultimately provide a recommendation to the state for designation. So,
Okay, I was curious. Anybody else? Seeing none?
all right. Ordinance amendments, this should be, we talked about this, I think, a little bit more heavily during the workshop. So first, policy 3.1 is to adopt a demolition delay ordinance. This is really touching on, should there be a request to demolish a building, that there's automatically language in our ordinance that allows the commission to delay action on the request for up to 1 year. The intention for, the intent behind that 1 year mark is, at least based off of other communities, is to try to have a more thoughtful conversation in a way with the property owner in question, with the commission, with other stakeholders involved in our community, to really work together and make sure that a demolition request is the option of last resort, right? I don't think anybody in our community wants to hastily go through a demolition request that really this 365-day window allows this commission, city staff, the owner in question to really turn over all rocks to make sure that There's no other solutions, there's no other remedies that can occur other than demolishing the structure. Policy 3.2 is to incorporate economic hardship provisions within the city's historic preservation ordinance. So this item touches on if there are a specific architectural requirement outlined that a property owner cannot meet because of economic hardship reasons, that within our historic preservation ordinance, it would outline specific review standards that you as a commission would consider to determine if a variance from that architectural guideline would be met or not. As you may recall, this is not meant to say, this is not meant for a property owner to do an improvement that might be a 180 to what would be allowed on a building. This would say, hey, I'll use the example of roofing materials. Hey, say you're required by ordinance to still utilize a shingled roof. You say, hey, a shingled roof is too expensive. I want to go with another type of roofing material. It would be up to this commission to review those review standards within our ordinance to see, hey, would we be supportive of such a variance from our architectural guidelines? So that's 3.2. 3.3 is to consider requiring facade easements for building projects receiving financial assistance from the city. So this would apply solely to buildings that are eligible for listing on the National Register, either individually or as part of a broader district. And really what the intent behind this, and I'll use the Church of the Intercession building as an example, because that is that's located within an eligible National Historic District. If the property owner comes to, if we have a program in place where they could receive financial assistance from the city, I would look at it and say, yes, you're eligible for financial assistance. However, you are not subject to this commission's design guidelines because of your location. What a facade easement would effectively say is, hey, in exchange for me giving you money, me, the city, giving you money to do some sort of exterior improvement to your house, we're going to, as part of that grant agreement or that loan agreement, we're going to place a facade easement that says you agree to meet certain architectural requirements for a set given period of time. It could be the next 25 years, it could be the next 10 years, it could be an indefinite period of time. Those are still details that would still need to be cruxed out. The intent behind this is really to make sure that if the city is providing financial assistance to a property that contributes to our community's historic inventory, that there should be some community benefit in return, and that being, in this instance, the preservation of any historic attributes that exist within that building, or on that building, or within the broader site. Policy 3.4 is to promote the adaptive reuse of historic buildings as a sustainability initiative. So this is talking about roofing materials. This is talking about solar panels, green roofs, items like that. Policy 3.5, should there be any buildings that go through the demolition review process before this commission and ultimately is approved for demolition, this policy would encourage some language to say, hey, let's try to reuse those building materials in some other fashion. If it could be for public art, if it could be for the next building that may be located on that site, some other means to try to preserve a piece of local history even if a building would be demolished. 3.6, policy 3.6 is kind of similar to 3.4, is to incorporate some design standards within your design guidelines that touch on sustainability initiatives. Policy 3.7 is to adopt design guidelines about touching on the commercial use of a historic building's rooftop, so really focusing on rooftop activation, really more so for new development. A lot of the existing buildings along Main Street and Clark Street, just based off of where the mechanical equipment is located on the roof, it's not really feasible per se to encourage seating, let's just say, for a restaurant above. This is, again, more so looking for if there's any new buildings built downtown, if there's any buildings located downtown, that at least it could be designed in a way to encourage that rooftop activation. And then the last one, this applies specifically to you, is to provide some additional training opportunities for you folks as a commission, really touching on the regulatory aspect of your charter, focusing on the design guidelines, focusing on some regulatory procedures, how to run a meeting, items like that. So, gave you a lot there, more dense regulatory stuff. So, happy to take any questions and or feedback. Oh, okay. I don't know why I did that. I learned something new on Zoom. If you're idle for 40 minutes, it shuts you off.
Mikey.
Sorry about that, Casey. Let me just... I'm surprised in my 5 years here we've never had an issue like that. All right. So next topic, since there's no other feedback, I'll touch on is zoning and development. This is one where this topic area segues more from this commission to our planning commission. This will be the topic area that I'll touch on in more detail next week, Monday, at our October Plan Commission meeting. Before this topic area, I have a few policy recommendations. So the first one being to create conservation districts, matching eligible National Historic District boundaries. The reason for this policy recommendation is ultimately, of the 4 or so eligible national districts located within our community, there's going to have to be a public dialogue that occurs with those property owners to see, do you want to be in a National Historic District? If the consensus by the folks impacted are, no, I don't want to be in a National Historic District. Obviously, we as a commission, we as a city, we're not going to try to push that down their throats, so to speak. What a number of communities have done to address that is, hey, if you're not interested in being in a National Historic District, could you be interested in what's called Conservation District? And what this does, the best way to explain this is that the difference between a conservation district and that of a national district or even a local district for that matter is that in a local historic district, right, there's a lot of different types of improvements that are under your commission's purview. Anything as far as painting, doors, windows, siding material, roofing material, etc. The purpose of a conservation district is to really look at the big ticket types of improvements that could occur on a building. That being building additions, building new accessory structures like a detached garage, an attached garage. So under a conservation district, there would be some design requirements as it relates to those large scale types of improvements. However, there would not be any sort of purview over quote unquote smaller improvements on a historic building, like painting, doors, windows, etc. So this is really kind of meant to be that compromise in a way, if you don't want to be in a historic district, but there's a community consensus that we want to preserve to some degree the historic attributes that make up that district, that would be kind of the next best thing. Policy 4.2, and this is the one that bugs me the most as one who has to administer several codes that make up several ordinances that makes up the city's revised municipal code is that there are a lot of discrepancies that exist between our architectural guidelines, our historic preservation ordinance, our zoning ordinance, our sign ordinance, our subdivision ordinance. You get the point. The purpose of this policy recommendation is to really have a holistic review and make sure that there's no discrepancies between the two. The one example I'll give, because this happens a lot every single year, is somebody wants to install a projecting sign on a historic building. The rules and regulations behind how far the sign can extend beyond the face of the wall, how high the sign has to be from grade, differs within our sign code, differs within our design guidelines, differs from building code as well. My goal is to make sure that we're all in lockstep. It might sound kind of trivial, but that's something that bugs the heck out of me, if I'm gonna be blunt. So policy 4.3 is to amend what's called the downtown district future land use criterion to prioritize mixed-use development among historic buildings along Main and Clark Street. What this is getting at is, so here in the city, within our comprehensive plan, we have what's called a future land use map, and that future land use map looks parcel by parcel here in the city and places a specific desired future land use that we as a broader community want to see for that given parcel. These would be uses, broader uses such as commercial uses, industrial uses, multifamily, single family, institutional uses, etc. Basically, the boundary that makes up our downtown design review district, in our future land use map, it has what's called a downtown district future land use criterion. And the purpose of this policy recommendation is to tweak the verbiage of how we define the downtown district. There's been a desire from folks who participated in this planning process to say, hey, we want to make sure that the buildings along Main Street, that you have a commercial use on the first floor, residential uses on the second floor. How our comprehensive plan is currently written, technically, it doesn't prohibit somebody from purchasing a building along Main Street and converting a commercial use on the first floor to residential. So the purpose of tweaking this language is to ensure that mixed-use atmosphere that exists within those buildings along Main Street and along Clark Street.
What about the reverse, putting in a business upstairs, along with a business downstairs? Because that's the way it used to be.
It was.
I mean,
And we've done that recently.
yeah, you could make I could see arguments, thoughtful arguments being made both ways. The arguments I could see, I don't want to play a both sides argument, but the argument of having residential on the first floor, it helps reduce the shortage of our housing stock that exists. Your comment as it relates to commercial on the second floor being the historic use of the building, I get that too. So, I mean, is there a consensus from the group? Do you wanna, is it your preference to have it be all commercial when possible, to be mixed use, or I guess what's your thoughts as commission as a whole?
My thoughts, I like having commercial on the first floor. As far as the second floor, I don't really have a strong preference of,
I would agree.
I think either use is appropriate.
Yeah.
I just don't want to see it sit there vacant. Because
Okay.
there is a lot of unused space up there that could be used either for further commercial space or for additional residential. But just like later on, I see you have activating rooftops, and activating those second story and third stories that are not being utilized right now, I think should be a goal as well.
Has there ever been a review of the condition of a lot of those second stories? I've been in a few. A lot of them, I would say, I'm thinking one in particular on the corner across from the Century Downtown building, Rose House.
Yeah.
It's uninhabitable.
Yeah. No, there's a number of second floors that definitely don't meet building code. They're either grandfathered
I'm
or
surprised-
they're vacant and they can't be
I'm
occupied.
surprised that building is standing from what I've seen.
Yeah.
But I'm not an architectural surveyor, but there are some definite older second stories that would take so much money to reactivate. I don't know if it's possible for some of them.
Peter?
Because I mean, looking at adaptive reuse to meet affordable housing demand has been kind of like my pet project for like the last like year, and I've like looked at, I've attended some training opportunities. I've read about read about just different examples that have been done throughout the United States, and I think that could potentially be possible. I mean, because for example, there's a couple big examples. Fort Snelling in Minnesota being completely. I have information on that, and then there's also use of Oshkosh. There was there's an old school, Smith Elementary School, that they did a whole redevelopment of that, and with low-income housing tax credit, and I believe let's see, income tax credit. There's also and they kind of were. They used a lot of different creative use of a lot of different tax credits and loans and a bunch of different stuff that like really did a lot to rehabilitate some of these properties, and so
I think there's a way I could look at the language that I have under 4.3 to kind of be more clear that first floor wanted to be commercial use, second floor we're open if you want to be residential, if you want to be commercial. Really, it's going to be a case-by-case basis to see the feasibility of it.
yeah.
But I think that the buildings that you're going to be building where Shopko is, that was your intention, right? To have retail on the first floor,
For
downtown here, across from the bank,
Yeah.
where Shopko was.
So the conceptual plan, not the two along Center Point.
Right,
But
right.
for the other ones.
Yes, right,
Correct.
that were on Main Street.
Correct.
Right. So, I mean, I would just really hate, obviously, you would, if you were on the Main Street there, I can just see the curtains now.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I don't think it would work very well.
Yeah.
And plus, what door are you going to use? Is then the whole building is a residence on the first floor? I mean, obviously, the second floor, there were multiple studios,
Yeah.
artist studios downtown.
Dentists.
Right, dentists, I used to look at Kingsbury, 19 Kingsbury 03 at the dentist, on top of what was the sports shop, which is kind of divided up now. But, yeah, I think that what would, I don't know how the city could help on that, and obviously there's stairs that people have to go up,
Yeah.
but it would be really good if it was a small business incubator kind of thing, because the rent wouldn't be so high, because it is upstairs.
Any other thoughts? If not, I'll go. I think we've just got two more left. Sorry. Policy 4.4, rather, as someone alluded to earlier, that being to promote the rooftop activation of historic buildings within the housing and land use elements of the city's comprehensive plan. This intention is more so to tie together your commission's architectural guidelines with that of our long-range planning document, i.e. the comprehensive plan, to make sure that existing rules on the books, as long as our long-term vision, are in alignment with one another. And then the last one, encourage the adaptive reuse again of historic buildings, particularly vacant second floors, as an option to meet affordable housing demand. Again, kind of what we just touched on. So kicking back again, this I think is the smallest topic area in terms of the policy recommendations. Again, some of this is a little bit more centric to that of our plan commission and not this commission, but if there's thoughts, I'd love to hear it. Okay.
That's good.
Next topic area is financial assistance. First one is so amending the city's facade improvement grant program to encourage greater use. So on the top of page 63, provides some potential means to encourage greater usage of the program. So changing some of the eligibility requirements as it relates to eligible improvements. For example, tweaking the ranking order of applicant section to really prioritize projects that are also receiving tax credits if they fall within a National Historic District. Policy 5.2 is to promote that new financial assistance program that the city created last year, focusing on reopening windows that have been bricked in or boarded up at some point in the past. Policy 5.3 is to create the revolving loan fund for building rehabilitation projects. This is we talked about this during our public workshops, but is really intended to try to expand the scope of eligible areas, so it doesn't focus solely on commercial buildings within our downtown. This provides another funding mechanism for, say, residential properties within the Clark Street Historic District. Policy 5.4 is to partner with the Downtown Business Improvement District to create a commercial revitalization fund. This is a program, as alluded to in the plan, that the city of Milwaukee has that encourages the occupation of vacant storefronts. Really, this policy recommendation is touching on the fact that while interior projects or just the use of the land use of a historic building is obviously not under this commission's purview, right? But there's a connection point that exists that if more and more buildings in our downtown are being utilized, if the vacancy rates of our storefronts drops and drops and drops, there's a natural correlation that one would have in terms of improvements that are done on those buildings. If there's more rent income coming in to a specific historic building, there's more discretionary income at a property owner's disposal to perform long-term maintenance work on that building. And then policy 5.5 is creating some new financial assistance programs that prioritize single and two-family residential areas, really the Main Street, Clark Street Historic District, along with the other eligible National Historic Districts would be the priority areas. Policy 5.6 is to provide technical assistance to property owners in submitting rehabilitation tax credit applications, really saying that, hey, the city will assist a property owner if you want to receive in preparing and submitting a tax credit application. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of photographs that we as a city are privy to, that there's a collective benefit if we as a city can help assist that applicant through the tax credit process. 5.7 is to publicize and encourage state and National Historic District property owners to apply for tax credits. The big data point that I mentioned earlier this year is that there have only been two or three tax credit applications that have been awarded, and whose project has been completed in the 40, almost 50 years that make up preservation administration here in the city, which is a pretty sad data point. So really having that conversation first and foremost.
So Adam, doesn't the project have to be of a particular size?
For tax credit?
Right.
There is a minimum cost of, I believe, $10,000.
Okay.
So policy 5.8 is to kind of touching on the last policy recommendation, that's being to create a comprehensive list of state, federal, and nonprofit funding sources, and providing that on the city's website. Just providing a one-stop shop that if somebody wants to do work on a historic building, they could look at this one web page and see all the different opportunities that exist through those different sectors for financial assistance. Then, lastly, 5.9 is to prioritize community development block grants or CDBG funding for historic areas not within a local historic district and design review district. Really, the main reason why we as a city have not prioritized CDBG funds in the past is due to the extensive reporting process that exists with that sort of funding. You know, historic preservation is one of the eligible improvements, or one of the eligible project areas for CDBG funding. If the right project comes along, that shouldn't be a deterrence for the city to look at that form of financial assistance. So I gave you 8, 9 policy recommendations, and kick it back to the floor for you folks.
I don't know if you add it to either 5.5 or 5.8, because in my research for the affordable housing issue, like just seeing how inventive people have gotten in looking at areas like looking at like healthy homes grants and like all this other stuff, possibly adding language of create a comprehensive list or something like, and continuing to research avenues to provide more options or something like that.
Do you think it could be under 5.5?
Yeah.
Or are you a little hesitant with that because you don't want to focus solely on single and two family?
I don't know. I was just going in generally. I wouldn't know like whether it's 5.5 or 5.8, but I was just thinking of just, you know, just looking at the vast array of things that if you wanted to get creative, you could possibly do.
Mm-hmm.
And you're strictly talking about funding sources?
Yes.
Well, yeah, then that'd probably work better under 5.8, right? That list of different types of funding sources
Yeah, I don't know. I just
might work better if you want to.
That was just.
I can see that. Yeah, it could be 5.8 too.
Because I mean, for instance, for this Fort Snelling project, one of the sources of money to lessen the rehabilitation costs was, you know, looking at environmental cleanup loans, that sort of thing, and just kind of like looking at that sort of environmental stuff.
Green building.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's what I got.
right?
Because I just think that it sends the message that it's like, yes, we understand that preserving, whether it's a residential or business, is in lockstep with our guidelines. Yes, it's going to could potentially be costly, but we're doing everything we can to let you know that there are resources that can help with that. So I just think it'd be good messaging for people who are also future areas where it's like, oh, but yes, I'm taking on this responsibility, but look at how much potential sources of funding that I'd be able to get access to.
No,
So-
I'm glad that you mentioned the environmental cleanup, because some of the areas that could theoretically become developable in the downtown area, that is one of, if not the major roadblock.
Yep.
So next topic area I'm going to touch on is tourism. Probably an area that, at least for sure I am a little less knowledgeable of. So policy 6.1, we've talked about this in the past. Most recently, our last commission meeting is to create a plaque program, to showcase historic buildings, sites, and improvements, both existing and lost. Policy 6.2 is to partner with the County Historical Society to create a virtual walking tour of the city's historic areas, at least according to John when I last talked with him this spring. It sounds like that's a project that's currently underway, that they're in the beginning stages, but that's something that we as a city can more than welcome to work with him in terms of providing information or providing some platforms that we can distribute that virtual walking tour to. Policy 6.3 is touching on an existing funding source offered on the state level through what's called the Wisconsin Heritage Tourism Program. This is a program that requires collaboration between the municipality, the local Convention and Visitors Bureau, and the local historical society. Essentially, it allows for a audit of the city's, in this case, the city's historic areas that also contribute to local tourism. And I think one of the examples I gave during the workshops in May is, hey, think about if you're an outsider who is coming to Stevens Point for the first time, what are some of the areas that a visitor would most likely frequent? You might be thinking the brewery, you might be thinking Century, you might be thinking our public square. Those are all areas that contribute to the city's historic inventory. So much so that there's a natural correlation between where places where people want to visit, or places where people want to tour, with that of those same areas also having historic value for that given community. So what this heritage tourism grant program does is that it does a audit. Someone from the State Tourism Board comes down to Stevens Point and basically just does a comprehensive audit, and then works with those three agencies to come up with ways for how we can leverage those two scenarios. The fact that people want to tour a historic area, how can we leverage that through preservation efforts as a community, through educational initiatives with the Historical Society, and with local tourism efforts to bring more and more people to those areas. Policy 6.4 is to assess historic buildings and sites that contribute to heritage tourism. Sort of similar in a way to policy 6.3 is to identify all the locations where people want to frequent that are also considered historic, like the brewery, for example, that I mentioned earlier. 6.5 is to work with community organizations to establish a history museum or facility in Stevens Point, right? I think most folks know in larger communities, or even in communities our size, a good number of them have a kind of a one-stop shop where folks can take a look at specific artifacts or whatnot that contributes to that given area's history. So this is for sure probably the most ambitious and the most long-looking, the most forward-looking policy within this whole plan. But this is looking at some point in the future. How long it takes, who knows? But to work with some other community organizations here in Point to have a history museum or facility of our own.
Like the Cool House, the castle.
And then the last one, 6.6, is to develop branding materials to highlight heritage tourism attractions in Stevens Point. This would be one where really the CVB, Convention and Visitors Bureau, would be one of the main facilitators with that. So kick it back to the floor again for comments or thoughts. Okay. Second to the last would be sense of place, really focusing on how we can improve the streetscape environment that is located within and on the periphery of our historic areas. So policy 7.1 focuses on supporting public transit improvements along Arterial and Collector Streets. Clark Street would be one example to provide some safe and better public transit improvements. Again, more of a long range, a more forward-looking policy recommendation. 7.2 is to provide more illumination and public art along the Church Street underpass. This is really focusing on, this was kind of a hidden gem that was touched on a lot in the intensive survey, the 2011 intensive survey, and that being kind of what's referred to as the ice cream district, that area along Park Street, along Carl D's, Belts, Canadian National Railway. That is an area that is a hidden gem in terms of the historic attributes that area possesses that a lot of people just don't know exists. So what are some ways that we can try to better accent that area? And the underpass is one such example to try to make that area a more inviting place for people to walk to and from. Policy 7.3 focuses on the intergovernmental relations piece. So collaborating with UWSP to incorporate landscaping improvements along Clark Street in front of Old Main. So really focusing on that larger city block, working with them to better administer or to better implement their facilities plan to encourage more landscaping along that area.
So what are you saying along Clark Street?
Clark Street. It could be landscaping, it could be seating, and so really having the city be of assistance in adopting policy recommendations that they have within their facilities plan for that corridor.
But what are you?
See you, Janet.
What are you saying, as far as, I don't quite understand that. I don't understand how university landscaping ends up on Clark Street.
Right.
I don't understand that.
Old Main is on Main.
Yeah.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Probably meant to say Main Street, not Clark Street. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you. I
But
get
it
what you're
says
saying.
Clark
I get
Street.
what
Yeah.
you're.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay, I couldn't quite understand
Thank you.
that.
Thank you.
I knew where you were
It
going
is the
with it.
neighborhood.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
When you look at this for so many hours in front of a screen, sometimes you get
Right.
stuff mixed
That's
up.
why
So
paper's
appreciate
really-
it.
Paper's really good.
And that's the reason for these
Papers, yep.
conversations.
Right.
So,
One of the
Clark
easy things to do right off the bat is, if you go to Madison, they have banners or signs that this is this neighborhood, it's that neighborhood. The east side of Stevens Point was always called City Park. That name has kind of disappeared. It was called City Park. I mean, there's no indication on Clark Street that it is a historic district, and it could easily be just a banner on the light pole. I mean, the south side, the same thing. You could put some banners banners that it's the ice cream territory. You know, I mean, that would be really an easy thing to do right off the bat. And actually, it gives us a presence to some extent, you know?
And then also for 7.3, I think, I don't know if this is the right area, but we also talked about during the walking workshop part of partnering with UWSP, like art to do like public art along there. Like we talk about statues to some of the important people, like, you know, like who's May Roach, you know, who's
Right.
all of these people that these big buildings are named after. Who are those people? And having that with statues around there would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get where you're coming from. So kind of tweaking the language so that it's not just about landscaping, that it's about
Public art institutions and stuff like that.
make it a little bit more flexible.
And then like, could also provide like educational purposes there too.
Oh, for sure. So policy 7.4 would be partner with now Downtown Business Improvement District to promote the use of flowers or other low-rise vegetation along Main Street and Clark Street, kind of focusing on beautification efforts, so to speak. Policy 7.5 is to evaluate and implement lighting improvements that are context sensitive. What we talked about a lot back in May was to try to emulate light fixtures like that of along 3rd Street by Midstate within other areas of the downtown. I know this has been a far-reaching request in the past, but working with the state DOT to try to swap out the light fixtures along Center Point that are real tall and more that extend inward. There's a specific name for it that I'm blanking on, but try to replace those types of light fixtures with something that's a little bit shorter, a little bit more straight to try to better promote a pedestrian-oriented environment within that area.
And you know, they were going to put those high lamps on the bridge.
Yeah.
And I remember at one of the meetings, I said, well, why is it that Minocqua doesn't have those tall lights when you cross the bridge in Minocqua? And they said, oh, you don't have to have those.
Well, I know there was some.
That was
it was
obviously a while
relatively
ago.
recent when that request was brought up to WisDOT, and that's the response that was received was.
Well, is it guidelines or is it something?
Requirements, yeah.
Requirements.
Sounded like it was requirements,
Well, they may have said that.
unless there were.
They may have
I wouldn't be
changed
surprised.
requirements too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
Yeah. So that was one examples that addresses then policy 7.5 here.
Can I just say one other thing about lighting?
Yes.
Is that I would really like to see dark sky lighting so that the light is down on the street instead of washing everything. You know, I know that certainly at the new park, it washes the neighbors. So they can't really sit on their porch and not have sunglasses on in the evening. But I think that, I mean, downtown, there's no reason to why that light can't be directed down, you know, instead of around everything.
Okay.
It's good for the telescopes, too.
Yeah. Policy 7.6, this is something that often gets overlooked, and that is to collaborate with city departments to adopt an ADA transition plan. This is a federal requirement through the Americans with Disabilities Act that says any organizations, any workplaces that has more than, I'm blanking on the exact number of employees, it's not much, that if you have so many employees or more, you're required to have an ADA transition plan in place that ultimately identifies all, in this case, let's just say the city, identifies all public buildings, parks, identifies hazards or areas that are not ADA compliant, and come up with some specific implementation strategies and timelines to address that. So this is really focusing on the accessibility piece of everything, of how can we make our historic districts more accessible for people of all ages and abilities.
I think that, some of the policies before were sort of anti-accessibility, at least according to some people that I've talked to, like the owner of Graffiti said he wanted to put some sort of accessible ramp on the side of the building, and he said the city did not allow him to put a ramp because of historic preservation. And
Interesting.
My father's in a wheelchair and he can't go virtually anywhere downtown because there's no place for him to use the bathroom. And so he might come downtown in his chair to see concerts on the square, but once he has to use the bathroom, he's gone. So I think, we can't let historic preservation sacrifice accessibility for other people as well.
Appreciate it.
And the library's not open at night, probably.
It's not. No. That's about the only place with an
Right.
accessible bathroom.
Yeah. So policy 7.7 is focusing more so on the development, on new development to incorporate either a brick or a cobblestone or a stamped concrete sidewalks to better match the aura, so to speak, of of our historic streetscapes. And then second to last, policy 7.8 is to collaborate with property owners to encourage the long-term maintenance of existing murals. Really having the conversation that I think we as a commission, and I will say at least for me as city staff, can do a better job on, is having dialogue with property owners of a mural that has a mural on their building to talk about the maintenance that's involved to try to encourage such long-term maintenance, so you don't see the peeling and chipping of paint in the long term, that you don't see the impact that paint may have on the underlayers of brick on that given building. And then lastly, 7.9 is focusing more on our parks and open space areas. So prioritize the implementation of the city's comprehensive outdoor and recreation plan for the parks and open spaces that contribute to a historic district. Chief among them would be Piffner Park, Buchholz Park, Iverson Park would be the main ones. There's a few of the smaller parks like Admiral Park, to give one example, where that would also apply. So, any other thoughts?
Just in 7.8, you're talking about keeping the art up, doing maintenance on it. There should probably also be something in there on removing the art and bringing the building back to its original condition, because there are many, that's a whole science. So if you could put something
Sure.
just in regards to that. Because I think there's a lot of the murals that are up now, some of them are just not repairable. And getting the building back to the way it was with blasting with dry ice, whatever, there's many ways to do it, but.
But you do have to be careful, because you don't want to break that outer surface of the brick, so then it starts soaking.
In most cases, it's gone.
Yeah.
Yep, that was it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Then the last topic area would be that of education and advocacy. So, policy 8.1 would be to partner with realtors and financial institutions to provide informational materials to new homeowners about the history of their historic building, the regulations that may exist, and the resources available to them. Really providing information to those other stakeholders that a new homeowner would work with to ensure that they are up to speed on everything that one needs to know about owning and maintaining a historic building. Policy 8.2 would be that of developing an educational handbook for property owners. So in a way similar to 8.1, but available to all property owners. So even even somebody along Clark Street, let's say, who has owned their house for 20 years, right? Ordinances change over time, architectural guidelines change over time, that I think there's opportunities for us as a commission and I as city staff to better make sure that changes in our regulatory provisions and our financial assistance programs, changes in state law and programming and state programming, that information is handed down to the property owners as well. That it doesn't stop with you folks and I. 8.3, relatively new, so since last year, this Stevens Point became a Main Street community, is to really increase the information that exists with property owners of the design assistance opportunity that exists with the Main Street, Wisconsin Main Street program. So as obviously Mark is privy to as well, as part of the Main Street program, there's the design assistance piece where, Carol, let's just say you own a building downtown and you want to replace all your windows, all your storefront windows with something. There might be some concerns or some questions that you may have about how does it look like, how is that going to look, how is that going to feel as part of being through the Main Street program, that there's some technical assistance that exists with them where they can draw up a rendering of what this will look and feel. You know, this will assist you as a property owner in this instance to better make a decision of what you want to do in terms of a potential improvement, as well as really improving the approval process that exists with this commission, right? It's a lot easier to explain what one is proposing to do if you have a high quality rendering that's showing what you want to do. So there's that policy. Policy 8.4 is to create an annual report on historic preservation here in Point and present it to this commission and the Common Council. This is focusing on the educational piece and highlighting some of the recent actions that have been occurring in historic preservation, some of the challenges that may exist to the policymakers at bay, that being you folks in the council. Policy 8.5, this might sound like the most trivial recommendation, but is one that's kind of been perplexing to me for quite some time, to be honest with you, and that is to include meeting minutes of this commission on the Common Council agendas for approval. Most other committees that make up the city have their meeting minutes included as part of the consent agenda on a council agenda. Historic preservation is not one of them, or Bike Ped Street Safety Commission is not one of them, and our redevelopment authority is not one of them. In a way, I could sort of understand the redevelopment authority just given kind of the quasi, not quasi-judicial, but kind of quasi-nature of that committee and how it's structured. But I don't see a reason why we can't, as a historic preservation commission, include your meeting minutes on council agendas.
Especially since they're the next level of appeal. If there's somebody that disagrees with this committee's decision, that's the next level of appeal, so that'll keep them apprised of things that are being done and keep them in the know, so.
Correct.
I've thought the same thing,
So, policy 8.6 then would be to produce regular newsletters to property owners of historic buildings. Policy 8.7 would be to partner with UWSP to produce workshops with students and community advocates on the importance of historic preservation. So creating some more community programming that could exist here, focusing on historic preservation. Policy 8.8 would be to create an awards program that recognizes property owners of successful historic preservation projects. So really reducing maybe some of the stigma that some may feel about doing work on a historic building by better showcasing, hey, I greatly appreciate the efforts that you've done, the financial commitment that you've taken, the time commitment that you've taken, some of the cutting through the red tape, so to speak, that may exist with doing a certain project. So creating that recognition piece to successful projects.
There was a time that we handed out, what would you say, recognition of the houses.
That was the Century Homes Project. The
Right.
Historical Society
Right,
ran it. It was
right.
very successful.
Right.
Little plaques that you put on
Right.
your house.
So policy 8.9, so this would be to establish an online database of the city's historic collection. This is sort of similar to the policy recommendation earlier on about the city assisting property owners in tax credit applications. The city, as I mentioned, is privy to a lot of information through our city assessor's office, through photographs that have been taken over the decades. This is definitely a heavy task, don't get me wrong, but if there's a way that the city can provide such information like age of construction, what are some of the permits that were pulled over the last 20, 30, 40 years that focuses on the exterior of a building. Again, providing a timeline of historic photographs of a building. To provide that information to the masses on the city's website would be one ticket to ease the concern, the nervousness folks may have through a tax credit application process. And then the second to last would be to create online tours and websites about the lost buildings that were consequential to the history of Stevens Point. As I think a lot of the folks here on the commission know, there were a lot of buildings that were demolished in our history, many of which has contributed to our local history over time. So better recognizing those the history of those buildings so it doesn't become lost within
And
subsequent
so many of those buildings went down in the 1960s.
Yes.
I mean, I remember them. I remember them. Yeah.
And yeah, like I mentioned at the tail end, try to make sure that that's information stays for future generations so it doesn't become lost as new generations, as Gen Zers become older, as Gen Alpha now becomes more and more.
We talked about for the historic district having some kind of plaque for houses and somehow how you could do a picture of it, and certainly the courthouse, and the Carnegie Library, it would be really good to have a plaque on those corners that those places, as well as the post office, existed on that site, and we don't have anything like that.
No.
There's not something on the side of another building or anything across the street, there was this.
This was the site of, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The only one we have is the school,
Yeah.
Yeah,
the parking lot.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, you're right. And that blew over.
Oh, really?
It moved. No, the school was moved, right?
Well, the Historical Society moved it.
Right.
Because we wanted to create a museum. The
Right.
city said, we don't want that. We don't want a museum.
Well, that was a while ago. Yeah.
That's why it's in Plover.
I know. I'm thinking that is just too bad that everything is in Plover. I mean, it's good for Plover,
Yeah,
yeah,
but that's why it's there.
but, wow.
All right, policy 8.11 would be to create an ambassador program that focuses on historic preservation. The intention behind this is to leverage third-party support for preservation advocacy here in Point. Right, there's a lot that is relied on me as staff and you folks as commission members to try to better advocate for preservation action here in town. So trying to create an ambassador program to add some more advocates here in our community, but also to lessen the workload that us here at the table may have. And then the last one, we went through a ton of policy recommendations, is to amend the noticing process of proposals before the Historic Preservation and Design Review Commission for consideration. So the example I have here is to basically notify property owners surrounding a site that is proposing something before this commission. Yeah, I think the example that, Tim, you might have alluded to this earlier, that other communities have done is, if Carol, you want to put some new windows in on your building, you have to go before this commission. One way you could implement this policy is to say, hey, you're required as part of the application process to put a one of those cheaper kind of political sign-esque type signs in your front yard that says, hey, there's going to be a request before the commission on this day to view more, look at this website.
They do that in Whitefish Bay. I noticed there's one right next door to where my daughter just moved. Yeah.
So an easy way to
Sign on the front yard.
an easy way to make it more recognizable that, hey, you're in a historic district, and hey, there are some improvements that require some degree of approval. So, and then for the last time, any thoughts or comments or issues that folks have with the policies for this topic area?
I think you should go back to page 22. And just think of how forward-thinking the city was when they had an 1883 development guide.
I know. I was told by John. 1983.
1883. No, that's forward-thinking, I think.
I'll say.
That it is.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming we probably don't want to go over the implementation, or
Yeah.
it's up to you.
No, I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. So I guess your homework, this for sure will be your homework.
Yes,
will be
Mr. Kuhn.
to look at. It's professor.
Oh,
Or
sorry.
doctor.
Doctor, sorry.
Would be to look at the implementation matrix. As you can see, I purposely have it broken down by each policy recommendation, giving a timeline to complete, really breaking it down into 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 to 20 years for ongoing, cost estimate, partners, and priority. The thing that I think is going to be really helpful for me that I'm going to ask you to look at with a microscope is the priority column. Are there areas that I may have put a low priority on that you think should be deserving of a higher priority, and then vice versa? I try to have more of a pragmatic approach to filling out these tables, but obviously it's just one person working on it, so.
Would it be inappropriate to include high school students in something like that? A workshop?
I can do it, yeah. Policy, that was 8.7, and then high school. The last thing I will say is, so we have our Plan Commission meeting next week, Monday. Obviously, you folks are not required to attend that. Monday, October 28th at Midstate, starting at 5 p.m. is when we'll have the open house, where I'll present on this draft planning document and solicit some feedback from the community at large. So my plan is probably sometime maybe mid-October is when I'll shoot for a commission meeting where we can circle back on the implementation section and then any large-scale comments. So that, I appreciate it.
We are adjourned.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.